Hello and welcome back to the Founder Files. As we wrap up 2024 and as many of us take a very well-deserved break, it's often a time for reflection and reminiscing about the year that we've had so far, and we are no different. So we wanted to reminisce about the amazing year that we've had with the podcast and do a two-part series on some of the awesome things that we've heard throughout the podcast. And I think a bit of a twist here is that I have, besides obviously doing the recording and hearing my voice, I have no involvement in terms of the choice of what's going on. I've left that entirely up to our incredibly capable and talented podcast editor and producer, Luke. So you're going to get his selection of some of the amazing things that we've heard on the podcast this year so far. So introducing part one, where we'll be looking at literally that, the coolest things that we've heard in this year. Whether it's Melvyn Lubega's B2B sales tactics or the fact that Daniel Guasco went from zero to exit in 156 days, Luke has put together an amazing montage of some awesome things that we've heard throughout the podcast this year. And if you think that there's some other amazing things that you've heard on this podcast that's not on this list, please say so in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what's really stood out for you in the season so far. But without further ado, I think let's get straight into this montage episode. Please enjoy some of the most awesome things that we've heard this year so far. Welcome to the Founder Files, the podcast that's like eavesdropping on a conversation with a successful entrepreneur over a fireside chat. Join me, Cameron Coots, through this unique experience of unfiltered stories and insights from scaling founders around the globe as they share their ups, downs, and everything in between. So I just want to go deep dive into that journey now of you firstly realizing what it is that you knew about B2B sales, and that's the nature of no one in the business can sell better than the founder, and that's how it should be. At least 0 to 1 and steps after that.
Yes.
After that, I don't know. You ideally want people better than you in everything. So talk to me just about that journey and that your journey in terms of taking you with a core capability for that, as you mentioned from the founding story. How did you build that into the business? And what was, you would say, the process to the point where, cool, that capability is fine. Let's focus somewhere else.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting point. I'm a believer that, especially in the 0 to 1 journey, you shouldn't hire for a role you haven't tried yourself, which is a hard task to do. It's easy on sales. I mean, if you're not a technical founder, you'll struggle. But for me, it was if you don't know the pain. So even when I was heading up sales and we had 70 guys in our revenue org, whatever it was at the time, before we started to do more partnerships and stuff, I used to make sure even once a week I still cold call or try cold call a customer, just so you get a sense of the cold face of what's happening, because otherwise you can quickly divorce yourself. Because one thing sales guys can do is sell, and one thing you can do better than sell is sell themselves. And so from that perspective, in an interview, you will leave there being okay, fine, I want to hire 10 sales guys, that's going to be my revenue, that time is a quota, but when they get there, boom, will be a unicorn. And it never works out that way. And by the time you realize the guy's not working out, or the goal's not working out, you spend 6 months of salary and you've burnt your runway, and there's so many things with that. And so for me, it's almost if you understand the buying process and actually break it down from experience, you deeply understand. And also in the same vein, to your point, no one can articulate that passion like the founder can. Obviously, you can pepper it in the big contract. The founder comes out hey, you're important to us. Let's go when you get to scale. Or you create the false sense of, hi, this is Melvyn's assistant. Okay, hi, it's Melvyn. But either way, it's just thinking through, that sales funnel. I think for us very early on, it was one, losing our experiences. And so for me personally, so when I was looking for my first role, when I was in final year at UCT Actual Science, I'd spent more than half the year outside the country. I was running a program in Washington, D.C. for internship and young leaders. And coming back 2 weeks to finals and not having a job offer. And I was okay, cool. I'm how do I do that? And so obviously all my friends had the job offers, many of them on bursaries. I was on scholarships. I didn't have an exact path to go to. And I said look, I literally reached out to the CEOs of all the big companies I wanted to work with. And so, thinking through the basics, and something which worked well for me was hey, look, my logic was if I reached out to the CEO, got their attention, they would obviously fob me off to HR. But by the time HR got the list from the CEO to be
it's coming from the CEO.
Okay, hey,
it's
Melvyn,
not coming from the
exactly.
literally,
literally, list, and you figure out the image. Is it Is it whatever, s.kosef? Is it Stephen.kosef at Investec? Is it back then, Bum at Deloitte or Lwazi.bum at Deloitte, whatever it was, all the companies I was trying to target. And you just figure out the email addresses and you say, like, look, the most clickbait heading ever around partnership and world domination. So they click on the email. And I remember that email was ridiculous. Probably had like half my CV in there saying like, hey, young South African, would love to do whatever with you. This is who I am. And yeah, someone replied be like, hey, Melvyn, I don't know, I got my email address, but hey, hey, Cynthia, Carol, please meet Melvyn. And then you get someone replying like, oh, sorry, Mr. Lubega, for the late response. We'd love to chat to you. And what I replicate that in my journey for sales.
And for the record, you've already applied to that job. Like, you've already applied to the job, and like you've got the formal application in there, and you're going CEO route, and then it's like, oh yeah, sorry, we were getting to your application. Don't worry.
and so the key thing there, the insight for me was, how do you leverage the social equity and respect of peers? And so, for example, I always know the ultimate buyer is going to be someone in the HR L&D function. But I'll probably go via the COO or the CFO or someone to be like, hey, I don't know if you're the right person, but this is what we do. Could you get me to the right person? If you're not the right person, they'll be like, look, I'm not the person that deals with learning, but here's my colleague. And so by them doing that, the person will be like, oh, HR, okay, cool. Well, Samantha said I should check this out. I'll check it out. And so being able to, so I would, in my SDR world, I would never really target my first email on my exact target. I would always have my cadence to be like, hey, who are the peers of the person we're targeting, and get the introduction from them. Because if you're an L&D manager, everyone's going to ping you around some L&D tool. Same if you're a CFO, everyone pings about ERPs. But if you ping a CFO about an L&D tool, it's like, yo, not my space. Speak to XYZ. And so it was just interesting being able to leverage different tactics and A/B test what makes the most sense. And so that's why by the end, our like cold call script or like our email campaign or the subject heading and this, that was down to a T that is unrivaled. Because we're able to think through those implications and work on the reaction, where's clicked on, where's not clicked on, who clicks through, doesn't click through, what works. And so very much data-driven at the outset around thinking through that funnel from that perspective.
That's so fascinating because, if I'm just thinking about myself as a founder, I mean, small team of 5 people, right? But now if I'm going to be, and we're receiving emails all the time from mostly B2B service-based businesses. That's exactly why I don't ever really want to get into email outreach myself for that sense, specifically about what we do. Could be a flawed thinking, but we'll get into that separately. But the point there is that instead of coming directly from the provider and saying like a account executive there, or salesperson, or even someone like relatively high up within the company, if someone in my team was like, Cam, is this something that you'd be interested in? Instantly, I'm giving it the time of day and the consideration. Versus looking at the email and barely even opening it. I'm not interested. I don't need this, right? Versus receiving it from someone in my team would be like, well, let me think about it and see if I do need it. And that's so subtle, but so clever because it's making everyone's life a bit easier. I mean, look, you might have slightly inconvenienced the ops person or CFO or whoever it might be. It's like, okay, passing it on, but then they forget about it instantly, and then like that's immediately get attention. I think that's such a golden nugget, and so subtle, but really effective.
So to your point, I don't think it's often an inconvenience for the person who refers you on, because if they believe that by referring you on, they're adding value to their colleague, they will do so willingly. And so, Dropbox's double-sided referral is well known, where, they were able to say, like, look, you, by referring someone, get space, and you give the person you're referring some space as well over and above their current quota. And so it's almost a sense of like, hey, I'm gifting you something. Even though I'm benefiting, I'm gifting you. Try this thing out called Dropbox.
I'm helping you.
And so I'm able to say, hey, exactly. I'm able to say, hey, like, look, we have worked with companies similar to your spouse and helped them achieve these kind of outcomes. And we think the same would be true for you. I don't know if you're the right person, but if you aren't happy to come to the right person, it's almost like saying, hey, person, you're the expert in your field. I'm recognizing that you're my colleague. This could be valuable to you. And you're then also adding value to their lives.
I already want to know about Groupon. And obviously the main things that I've got going in my head is like, I remember Groupon when it was rising and it was growing so quickly. And then it just declined out of nowhere. And I just want to know, I'm sorry, I'm not going to save the last question and bring it at the beginning. I'll save the last question for last. But just how did that kick off and start?
Yeah, so I suppose I think that's I just want to touch on the prior point that you made because I think it's quite important. Although one often comes into the spotlight or whatever in the media, whatever, off the back of some sort of either big success or failure at some sort of level. The journey to those points is often not known. And I suppose it was a hell of a tough journey to get to the Groupon point and then through that too. But I think it's just important to reference, only because I think it's it's not all just simple. Get going, you start a business, and next thing you sell it to Groupon top 10, which was kind of what was very much presented in the media. It was essentially a 10, 12-year journey to that point of other prior failures, elements of maybe success, if you can call it that, working 7 days a week, having to doubling up on jobs to kind of pay for calling time, to provision your router to make calls and whatever the case. I literally was working 7 days a week for probably about 4 years of my life. And I mean, like literally weekend job and then trying to run the business on during the week and whatever. So anyway, so we get on, and we, I think I mentioned I took some time off to do a bit of studying. I ended up doing at London Business School and meeting a gentleman there who was far more brighter than I was in terms of sort of technology. He sold a prior company to Yahoo. And I actually was quite a lot younger than me at the time too. And, we were chatting and I got quite friendly and I said to him, what would be the next, what is in his view, does he, what's he focusing on after completing his degree? And he said, his master's, whatever. And he said that, he would be Groupon. And, I was like, what's Groupon? Never heard of that. Anyway, Dad started looking around. I think it only struck, and I said to him, well, have you thought about doing anything in Africa or, other side of the world? He's like, no, it's focused in the UK. He was of Asian descent but he was based in the UK and that he was going to tackle Europe. And it was on the 4th of January, 2010, that I realized what Groupon was and the magnitude of it. And sort of the media broke with the fastest growing company in history to reach $1 billion in revenues and whatever. And then I realized what Jack was talking about in the sense of why he was chasing this and what was actually involved. But the same day he said to me, look, unfortunately, I'm not, I've got to focus, this is huge, it's beyond all expectations. I need to focus on the UK market and, I can't be distracted by other stuff. And so we, that led to a journey. We found, it led us to then find other partners that potentially were looking at the same opportunity through the same actual network. So we met Leo, we met Annie Millian, who are still good friends and business partners in other regards, and of course Wayne, who I'd studied with.
Dan, sorry, I just want to pause you there.
Sure.
Just for the sake of the people in the audience who might not know what Groupon was. Sure. Can you just unpack to me, just explain what Groupon was as a business and business model?
Sure. Yeah, 100%. So Groupon essentially was, was an online e-commerce voucher business at its core. Groupon would go and negotiate deals and offers with different partners. They were service provider type establishments and all physical goods, right? So it could have been either, it was, restaurants, bars. It could also be physical goods, as in, stuff that you kind of buy and take lots. It could be as well, it could be activities. So, and the basis of it was that you logged, you became a customer or user of the platform. So you registered with the platform, you received a daily newsletter, and in that newsletter were a bunch of offers that crossed all those different categories. And it was obviously linked to discount. So you got you get a sizable discount off the back of whatever you pay Groupon for the voucher, and you get like a 50% off. So buy one, get one free burger deal, a fairly sizable chunk of discounts of whatever you're looking to buy. And you would then obviously pay Groupon. Groupon pays the supplier when you go and redeem your voucher at that establishment. And I mean, that's essentially the core of it. So, very kind of suitable at that time in terms of, just kind of where the world was at coming out of the 2008 financial crisis. For those that are obviously younger generation, maybe maybe lived through it, but didn't quite realize the impacts of it. But I can assure you, it's kind of 2008, 2009 were fairly challenging times in many parts of the world, from with the banks crashing, Lehman going under, and all the other stuff that happened. And kind of like, I suppose we entered a bit of a deflationary period. And so, deals and offers and things like that, where people have limited amounts of cash to spend, obviously a deal is always welcome, even when I suppose one has money. So, I mean, that's really what it was at its core. It added different value for different partners. Obviously as a merchant or supplier to Groupon, you essentially got, as exposure, because Groupon had a substantial base of customers and users, and as a customer you got a great deal. So it kind of worked both sides of the marketplace essentially. But yeah, I mean, there was not too much other magic other than that. But I think it had been your ability to buy physical goods. Amazon had been around for many years, and we bring that back here to South Africa. This was now the days of Kalahari pre kind of Takealot kind of really taking off. That's really all you could buy online in terms of e-commerce back in the day. You said you couldn't buy like a voucher for a restaurant, and bearing in mind the complexities of delivering a physical good versus a voucher, it logistically became a lot, it was a hell of a lot easier. It was for you as a customer. I'm referencing this now back to kind of Tungu or South Africa, where Tungu was the company that we started. It was kind of, what were your options? You would either, there was Kalahari that was selling physical goods. You would have to go and collect at the post office if you're lucky, and all kinds of logistical challenges. So trust in e-commerce wasn't quite there. Even to the degree of being able to facilitate payments was quite challenging. I mean, you didn't have the types of integrations and cards and payments and buy now, pay later kind of options that you have today, clearly. And the other element was there was a big degree of trust around knowing that actually what I'm going to pay for, I'm going to receive. Whereas in the case of Tungu, Groupon, whatever, it was you paid. It was the restaurant down the road, Cameron's Burger Shop, and I was buying a voucher for that. I was paying, the provider. I'll go and redeem it, a couple of hours later. And, I mean, we won different awards over the years for the impact we had in terms of e-commerce in South Africa. But I think it's a bit of an unsung story, not necessarily about what we did, but about the kind of adoption penetration that was driven through these group buying sites. Because although Kalahari and Takealot and have gone to, obviously Kalahari got bought out by Takealot or whatever, but the growth of e-commerce and where it is today is substantially greater than what it was then. There were some, it kind of seeded that market. It got people kind of used to buying online. It built trust in the marketplace. There's still some of the biggest suppliers in Takealot today were born off supplying the likes of us, Groupon and Tungu back in the day. And
so anyone listening to this podcast now who's listened to the episode with Claude and Luke, or who hasn't yet, go and have a listen to that episode to hear about Takealot and Superblist and that journey about e-commerce, and know that we're talking to a man that really kind of built the foundations that led to e-commerce being what it is now, at least as a business. Dan, okay, so let's go back to the story in the founding journey. I mean, so we've got a sense of what Groupon is, understood its position in the market. Like, let's talk about what you were still in the UK at the moment. This is when you'd met Wayne, etc. Just also again for the sake of the audience, Groupon was already an existing international business. It just it didn't exist in South Africa. So you obviously you came back to South Africa, started Tungu, which then got rebranded because it was bought out by the Groupon group.
Correct.
You were now the CEOs there. So just talk to me about that journey and how that happened from being the UK to doing that.
Yeah, so I guess so I can't write a line of code. My 12-year-old son can write more code than I can. Yeah, and so you kind of trying to get into technology, and how do you do that if it assumes that you have got to be able to do that. So the first problem we had to solve was, I got kind of introduced to this opportunity through Jack, who I met while I was studying. But the first problem to solve was we needed a platform, right? We become an e-commerce company, so how do you do that? And that was where Leo and Emilian came into play. They were, I kind of studied indirectly with them, and through London Business School, and I'd met Wayne while I was studying here in South Africa still, and we formed the company was formed, Al Media Global, and we essentially licensed out the platform, which empowered us then to we had the nuts and bolts to actually have an e-commerce site that could now replicate what Groupon was doing. So to be clear, it wasn't, we didn't build a Groupon, we bought essentially a copy of Groupon, for want of a better word. we then but it was all about execution. So we obviously we focused on South Africa because that's where the market we understood. But we had no customers, right? So the first thing is you've got to get customers that obviously sign up onto the site, otherwise you can't sell them anything. And you need the merchants coming in to supply you, and because otherwise they haven't got to offer. And I'll never forget. I mean, we launched literally on the day the World Cup soccer started in South Africa, 2010, it literally was the day we launched, got it all live, and it was a hell of a challenge. I mean, for the first couple of months, we were knocking on restaurant doors and providers' doors to try and get list their items on the website. Obviously, we were trying to work out how do you market online to actually get customers to kind of buy and use your services. But we first needed a product before we could sell. So it was kind of this chicken and egg, and we went around many kind of sort of iterations of that. But there were, we had a couple of lucky breaks along the way, and one of them was getting what was back in the day known as Madame Zagara, I think it was. That I think they any longer exist. And we got approached by I think it was a ballet association that were trying to raise funds. And they got given an allocation of tickets that they could use for an evening at Madame Zagara. And they were trying to sell them. They couldn't sell them. And so they gave us the opportunity to essentially sell it. And we made a very small commission. But that journey was quite instrumental because suddenly we had Madame Zagara as a featured, kind of restaurant on the platform. That allowed us then to go and negotiate with other restaurants and more established restaurants who were just fobbing us off. So, well, look, we've got something quite noticeable there.
It's a typical story of the fact that it's the ultimate thing, and it's, I'm not going to name names, but there's always the stories of the founder you'll take a picture or a reference or grab the logo or take a selfie outside of their business and say, hey, we're busy working with them, and then everyone else is like, okay, well, why aren't we doing this either? And it's the same story until you get that first 1, 2, 3. That's I think the hardest part, and then you just need to basically show the market is like, hey, if they're on it too, why aren't you doing this?
Sure, no, 100%. I mean, it's completely, and that was one of a few of these sort of lucky breaks where we got good partners onto the platform. But it was myself and Wayne literally going out there, knocking on doors, speaking to restaurateurs and suppliers and whatever. We didn't get into the physical goods; we were just focused on services. But gradually this started turning around and kind of getting a bit of traction. It certainly was. I mean, I think these days, I guess, first 6 months revenue, probably we do in less than a couple of minutes. I mean, back in the day, it was, kind of was chugging along. And what we realized quite quickly was that, it wasn't any magic that we had. It was actually quite, easily replicated. And by sort of, and so we realized we needed to fund this to kind of get it going quicker or find someone to sell it to. And actually, ideally, the best way to play this was to find the right partner who would the bigger player in the market, the international one, and say, hey guys, we here, come and talk to us. We're doing something.
Well, why not go to the people that you copied their idea from and be like, hey, do you want to buy this?
Pretty much, yeah. But and obviously now we, kind of I mean, this was back in January 2010. By middle of 2010, I mean, there were probably about 5 or 6 that had come to market, including ourselves. There was, another 20.
Sure, okay, so that was yeah. Yeah, so that was so clearly 2010 was the time where everyone was like, "Oh, this sounds like an easy business to start." Also, remember Entertainer coming and going within a similar period. Again, chronologically, correct. I don't know where it was, but there was this like real boom of e-commerce for vouchers.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. It was well worded. Yeah, and I think it was very much that. And so anyway, so a lot of kind of traction in the market, a lot of sort of. But what we did consistently was 2 things. We went to local large players. You can imagine who they are. I can't reference them still to this day because there's sort of all kinds of weird and wonderful things that happened during that journey because we ended up in a bit of a battle between a local entity and Groupon to actually in finalizing the buy deal. But I'll get to that just now. But we sort of approached local guys that we thought were sizable in the market that maybe might be interested in funding and buying us out. But what I also did was I used to email so Groupon was clearly the biggest player. but followed on by Living Social was another fairly sizable player that came into existence in the UK, in the US rather. And I found out the founder's details, their email address, and every Friday I'd send them an update, literally religiously every Friday, send them an update saying this is where we were. Last week we had X amount of growth, X amount of new customers, blah, blah, blah. Do you want to chat, whatever. Never got a response. I tried every variation. These days I guess you can find founders' email addresses quite easily. Back in those days you couldn't. LinkedIn wasn't as big a thing. I don't know how we managed to find the right address, but it was Andrew Mason at groupon.com. And one, it was a Friday afternoon, we get a call. We didn't have any offices. I mean, we literally operated out of my apartment back in the day. And we get a call from the what turned out to be the CFO of Groupon, saying, tell me a little bit more about you. It was literally 3:00 on a Friday afternoon, and he said, "Tell me a little bit more about the business." And we, gave him a few metrics. Had no concept of, Africa was like, is there like e-commerce even happening in Africa? Like, is it also Africa, or is it, like literally are the animals on the street, like, that kind of version. And then said, look, it seems like you guys are growing. I'm going to send an email and we'll see what we can do as a follow-up. And I didn't take too much to it, except what I did do is I let some local entity that we also having the same conversation with know that we just received a call, which led to an immediate meeting. That same Friday, we were called into a meeting at the building where this entity operated from, and they were suddenly started moving very quickly, saying that. They were quite surprised that essentially we'd managed to get this call, and there was this potential interest. They're very protective, I think, of their territory, and they didn't want sort of external people to be coming in. And I mean, I'm thinking it's a fairly sizable entity that's listed and pretty well known. And we, and then they basically came with saying, look, we'll have an offer ready for you by Monday. So we went from the call to the meeting to then having a follow-up email, as Mark had promised, from a gentleman called Oliver Samwer, who was the Samwer brothers, who, if you do a search online, you can find out more about them. But they had copied the Groupon model into Europe and were now tasked with scaling that globally. And Oliver said, can we meet tomorrow, like Saturday? And we said, look, we can't do. I couldn't get there by Saturday, but I can. We're Monday, and in essence, in the course.
Sorry, when can we meet tomorrow? Is like, can you? Because I mean, this is again before virtual meetings was a thing. Can you fly here right now?
Yeah. Basically, can you meet me tomorrow morning at 9:00? It's a Saturday morning. I was like, well, I can't do Saturday. I can do Monday, and that's actually what we did. Sure. And in parallel, we've got a local entity that's now kind of fighting, and we had obviously the real player kind of sort of expressing interest, and so I went back to the local provider and I said to them, by the way, that we've got to meet him Monday morning, and
in what city?
Germany, Munich, Germany. Yeah.
There we go. Cool.
So anyway, I mean, look, I won't get into there's a lot of detail here, but I mean, essentially, I walked into that meeting with the Samwer brothers with an verbal offer from another entity, and we walked out 20 minutes later with the agreement to buy the business.
See, everyone listening, fundraising and exiting really isn't that hard.
156 days. 156 days, yeah. But
sorry, 156 days? What's that number?
That was from the day we started to the day that we concluded the deal.
That is mental. The day you started Tongu is the day that just goes to show where market opportunities happen, you have to move quickly, because like that's pretty much unheard of. But also at the same time, if you look what's happened to online vouchers in an e-commerce space and where that exists now, i.e., it doesn't really. And so the point there is that to translate that to now, what goes up must come down, right? But before we get into that, now, so talk to me. So you've gone from founding to exiting in 156 days. That's mad. right? You went from over a weekend to having a phone call to flying up overseas, a 20-minute meeting to walking out with an offer in your hand. All of this is just screaming too good to be true. So what happens next, Dan? I want to pause here for a moment and talk about why it is that we created the podcast in the first place. The reason why I'm doing this is because in all the preparation sessions that I do with the guests before coming on the podcast, I obviously speak to them around the philosophy of the podcast, around the philosophy of Metavolve and why we're doing all this in the first place, because it helps provide the framework that allows the freedom for the conversation so they know what we're trying to get from the content. And I want to take a moment to just share this philosophy with you so you can understand just a bit more about us and what we do in the background. So the whole purpose of the Founder Files is to provide established entrepreneurs with practical stories and insights from people that have been there before so they can avoid years of trial and error in scaling their own businesses. Now, why is this philosophy important to us? Well, because this is a huge part of what we do at Metavolve. And if you're not aware of this, the Founder Files is owned by Metavolve, which is the company that I'm a co-founder of. And Metavolve's purpose is to accelerate the time it takes to build a great sustainable business. And our mission is to ensure that as many entrepreneurs as possible can take a holiday where they actually switch off whilst their business keeps growing. And our vision is imagine a world where just 10% more small to medium businesses were able to be sustainable without being dependent on the founders that started them. What would that do for the economy? What would that do for mental health? What would that do for being a present parent? What would that do for job creation, etc.? This is our little ripple effect way trying to make the world a better place. So Metavolve and the Founder Files essentially come together as a collective mission towards removing the founder's trap, allowing entrepreneurs to build amazing businesses, but also enjoy the fruits of their labor. Do so with less stress, do so with more time off and really being able to enjoy what it is that they've built, but at the same time, create a business that is exitable, whether or not they want to exit it, but also create the opportunity for them to focus on the innovation that they want to as they scale the business. And the means to the end of just doing that is one, on this side, all the experience shares and learnings from other entrepreneurs is we know as founders, we love to learn from other founders. We love learning in general. So this is a big part of that mission in order to be able to share these practical insights that these people have to share. But part of that mission and the means to an end here simply is strategy. And that's what we do at Metavolve is we do strategy, coaching, and facilitation. And the reason why is that how can we get all this thinking that you have in your business, because the strategy is already working if you're in the scale stage, and how do we simply download this into your team so that other people can take on responsibility and execute, and so you can do the hard thinking upfront so that you can actually switch off and allow yourself the freedom to be creative or the freedom to really do what you want with your time. So that's what we do at Metavolve. That's why we do what we do at the Founder Files. And I just wanted to share that with you so that you know exactly what it is that we're doing this for and why it matters so much to us. And if any of this philosophy resonates with you, whether you are an entrepreneur, whether you are part of an accelerator, whether you are in corporate ESD, whether you are an investor, I would love to chat to you. I'd love to see how anyone can align with what we're doing. Because if we can make the world a better place together by building sustainable businesses with healthy entrepreneurs that can really enjoy what they do with their time and with their attention, then I think we would all benefit. So please, if you share in this philosophy too, then please reach out to me. Follow the link in our description to go to our website. Let's have a conversation and see what we can do to ensure that more entrepreneurs can actually take holidays where they switch off whilst their business keeps growing. Let's even look at Disney for a sec, right? Like how did you manage to get one of the world's biggest brands full stop as someone that's willing to trust you in South Africa as well? I think that's tell me about that journey. How did you manage to get suppliers like that?
Yeah, it's quite a complicated one because the Disney conversation is basically there's two ways. Either there's always a minimum guarantee. So what Disney wants is they want to make sure that there's a minimum amount paid to Disney regardless of the volume you've sold. So, and that's a minimum guarantee you have to commit to because that's the financial amount that will go to Disney. Now, if you manufacture and you produce 10,000 units betting with Disney on it, as an example, you put that into retail. If the sell-through, however, is way below what you expected, you still have to pay that minimum guarantee to Disney. So you're taking actually quite quite a, like you, again, it's exactly the same case with the buyer, the retail example. You first have to be extremely certain that you've got a viable business case. And that's kind of like the risk is often put onto the supplier side, where you got to be certain you've got a good product at the right price, where the South African customer is wanting to have that product at that price before you actually make the investment. And sometimes there's other ways around it. Sometimes the retailer has a Disney license, so you can work together. The retailer is actually paying for that license, and you just manufacture on their license. Or you can actually have a supplier who's overseas and he already pays for an African license. So then you just circumvene it. You work together with the European supplier, as an example, and then you supply that straight into the South African market. So there's a couple of ways around it, but eventually it often comes down to risk assessment and are you believing that this is the right product at the right price?
So you also threw the word manufacturing in there, which is something I didn't necessarily expect. I mean, like in this Disney example, are you essentially going, I think this the product's going to win this market. I need to get this manufactured, but I need to pay for the licensing from Disney to do so. So you also go not just to them to pay for the licensing fees, but you go to a manufacturer with the product spec as well. And I want you to build X many units of this and I'm going to sell it.
Correct. Yeah, that's it.
Wow. Okay. So I mean, I'm the more I'm speaking about this, the more amazed I am at how complex this is, because there's just so, on the one side, you're getting pre-manufactured products, right, with their own brand, because especially if it's going to be innovative, that needs to be sold. And then you're going to be just showing what these new exciting things out in the world are, and you're educating retailers on that. On the other side is you're looking at the market and you're thinking, what are some really good products that are going to be able to sell here in terms of, and Disney's a good example, like especially if there's been recent movie that's come out, right? And I can imagine Deadpool and Wolverine was because I mean they own Marvel, right? So there would definitely be an increased demand here. But the products that are going to sell here versus the products that's going to sell in France are going to be very, very different. I mean, there'll be overlap, but even then, it's like that's not necessarily some situation where you're going and getting the product directly from the supplier that is Disney. It's actually got to do with the fact that it's like this product doesn't necessarily exist, or it doesn't exist in South Africa, and I need this to get manufactured. I need the approval, the licensing, the right manufacturer to do so. So you get into a product role as well, not just a distributor role. So that's also a very different space that you're playing in there as well.
Yeah, and that's also why our teams have a different setup. So the teams in a consumer electronics division, they actually work as vendor managers, and the vendor manager is the brand manager. I mean, we call it vendor manager, but it's basically a brand manager, and they own that brand from A to Z. So underneath the vendor manager is a key account manager with a team. So they live and breathe that brand. The part is the brand has done the legwork on the product, on the packaging, the product fit. If it actually is a viable product in the market, the warranties, the brand tackles that. In our home division, we actually work with category managers, and the category managers are in charge from A to Z on a product most of the time. They get a lookbook from a retailer, they have their own inspiration, they put that into kind of like a Pinterest board on like, this is the vision that we've got for that range for a brand. But they are the ones then going to factories, they do the sourcing part, so they literally do that part from A to Z. Now, ultimately, you always try to figure out like, what is the deciding factor why a customer is going to buy this product? So if you take a towel as an example, you know, like there's so many towels in the market, it's commoditized. This ranges from 59 Rand to over 1,000 Rand. It's a huge range. So you always try to think of like, what is going to make this product more special, so that if a product sees this product in store, a customer sees this product in store, what is going to convince that customer? And that's obviously often why you, for example, like, well, actually, we can do this with a new Disney movie as an example, because that's actually going to convince that customer, that's something that I require or want. But on the consumer electronics, the demand often is there already because it's a well-known brand. Like we sell Starlink, we do Dreamy, Extreme, Google. So like the kind of legwork of getting or creating demand is not always, but sometimes there is an awareness already. Whereas with towels, there is zero awareness. There's no reason, the customer doesn't know why this is a better towel as your competitor. a Disney, for example, is obviously like it's now suddenly a deciding factor for a customer. That's why I want to Star Wars. So to be honest, when we started the business, initially we thought like this is a buying and selling business. You buy a product and you sell it. But in my head, I sometimes oversimplify it still. Like this is just a buying and selling business. It's a trading business. By no means. There are so many levels of kind of complication that it's added to it that it actually gets quite complicated.
Like entrepreneurship is hard enough as it is. Whether it's, especially just with a business partner, there's a lot of conflict, there's challenges, etc. But the great thing is that when the business day ends, whatever time that might be, given whatever phone calls are, there's still this point of separation, and you can go home, right, to your other partner and be able to relax with them and maybe even vent about your business partner. In your situation, you can't really do that. So I just want to understand, I think I'm wording it in the sense of a challenge. There must be some beauty to it as well. But I just want to know, what's it like running a business with your spouse?
Look, it's not always easy. I think, and it's a language that Tracy and I have had to learn as well. I think we came into it with some very strong complementary skills and abilities and capabilities, and during those first few years, things were just so wonderfully exciting and so sort of forwardly, sort of mobile. Things were just dynamic, and I don't think I can throw any more adjectives in there, but there was just a lot of stuff going on that might have just, I think if what I'm trying to say is that if we had started and it had felt like a doomed venture from the outset, I think it might have been a lot harder. But Tracy, there was a lot of sort of positive reinforcement for both of us, because as we grew the business, things just seemed to keep going well. And I think it would have put things severely under far more strain, I should say, if we were faced with huge obstacles from the very beginning. And I'm not saying it was easy. It certainly wasn't. But for the kind of personality types that Tracy and I have and the skill sets we were able to bring to the business, I think for many years it was we were able to quite easily get around a lot of those pressures. Going home and talking business wasn't so bad as staying at work and talking business, because it was all consuming in a great way. We were traveling together to overseas shows. We were visiting overseas markets. We were dealing with lots of our distributors coming over here. It was fun and it was exciting. I mean, I should say that in 25 years, the longest holiday, and I mean this sincerely, the longest holiday we've ever taken has been 14 days. And those extra 2 days at the end were only because at the time there was severe load shedding and there was no point coming back to the factory because we didn't have a generator. So the government indirectly gifted us with an extra 2 days, which we spent on a beach. But aside from that, you make sacrifices and you learn how to speak one another's languages. Now, certain things happen along the way which makes it considerably more difficult, not the least of which is perhaps having children. There are an enormous amount of stresses. I think, in a way, I could say being in business together is far easier than being parents. I think that's perhaps one of the most challenging jobs there is. And if you combine all of that, then it does really become tricky. Everything becomes hyper stressed and quite tense. And in our case, in fact, our firstborn arrived 2.5 months too early. But many people remarked to us at the time, they said, well, wasn't that incredibly stressful? How did you guys cope? You seem to be so sort of effortlessly cool. And I think that early stage grading, that ability that to sort of work around one another that we had for the first 10 or so years, it probably made even having a very premature child quite easy. But it was just another day. It was just another obstacle. Would I recommend this to anyone? I don't know. I don't know. I think Tracy and I are very, very lucky that we do work really well together. But it takes time, and you have to get better at and have a view to constantly improving the whole time. It's also worth, and I'm quite happy to volunteer this. When Tracy first met me, I was 23 or 24 years old. We started this business when I was 24, which puts a neat date to my actual age now. And I mean, I sometimes feel quite sorry for Tracy that she had to deal with me as a 24-year-old man. Like what an awful, awful prospect that must have been. So if anyone deserves sympathy in all of this, it's probably Tracy. But again, I think not being able to separate work and business is a challenge, especially if things are going very badly. But in our case, we've been very lucky, and because we're both fundamentally very optimistic people, every day with new challenges, not a big deal. Let's just keep going. There's that kind of, you used the term entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial mindset earlier as well. I think in order to be that, you have to be almost ruinously positive about every day. You have to just believe that even if today was rubbish, tomorrow will be amazing. And if you bring that into your relationship as well, then it's okay if tensions rise from time to time. You're more focused on what's still to come. But again, I'm not sure that this would be the best advice for anyone. I think Tracy and I are very lucky that our partnership does sort of work from that perspective. We also have a very good and relatively clear, delineation of tasks as well. I'm very much more on marketing, company, sort of sales liaison, sort of more of the glue at the factory. And Tracy is very much more the leader on final finances, sort of the accounting side of things, and then also just new product development. And I try not to interfere with her new product development unless she asks me to. Tracy doesn't hold back on telling me about my marketing, though. So I'm not going to say it's an equitable relationship.
Well, yeah, I guess when is it? But I think what I imagine is the good times are really good. And even necessarily the bad times are also really helpful, because the one side of it is your partner gets it, right? It's like they share the stress with you, they share the excitement with you. So you're able to you'll be able to experience it wholeheartedly at every single moment because of that. But I think there's also an element of throughout this, and with kids, with building the business, with having to take care of yourselves without actually being able to take holidays, as you said, which also seems a kind of a combination of choice and just natural consequence of the people that you are. I think that the traits that you mentioned of being super positive and optimistic is huge, right? I mean, there's nothing that's going to really give you the ability to cope with stresses in life than just a prevailing sense of hope and optimism that's like consistent between the two of you. But I just want to know what are some lessons learned? Because I think there's things that anyone can take into either their own relationship, if they are, if anyone's in business with their spouse or with their partner, that's the one side of it. But even, we all have relationships, and there's things that being an entrepreneur can naturally cross over into that domain. And even with our business partners, I'm sure there's things that we can learn. So I think in terms of taking care of yourself, taking care of your relationship, taking care of your kids, taking care of your business, what are some of the things that you and Tracy have learned that has worked for you? Like you said, might not work for anyone else, but I just want to know what's worked for you.
Well, again, I'm not going to say I'm at the end of this particular story. I think we're still learning as we go, and I wouldn't say we've mastered it yet. So perhaps the first thing I would say is don't expect there's no guidebook for this. Don't expect to master it at any point. Understand that you're going to have good and bad days. You have to have the bad to appreciate the good. I think if you live, the big lesson for Tracy and I is that this word happiness is very mercurial and quite dangerous. You can live in permanent pursuit of this notional idiocy of thinking I'm just going to be like some happy moron wandering around the street with it. But that's not realistic. I think the trick is to understand sometimes it's okay to scowl. Don't give yourself a hard time if you do. If you do happen to find yourself in business with your spouse, I think space is important. Space and respect. You need to understand and appreciate what each of you, or if there are more of you, even that for example, working with siblings, I'm sure that's also bloody tricky. But you need to kind of be able to identify the great and the bad that the other person brings into it, and be able to kind of manage and moderate that, modulate it wherever you can. But then on those days that you can't, also understand that those days are there for a reason. I don't think it's a good idea to ever try and differentiate work from home. I think if you sweep stuff under the carpet at work that the person is doing to annoy you at work, that stuff will just follow you home. And by the same token, if you're at home, if there's something happening at home that's bothering you, you need to be able to have the space, and you've got to be able to make the space for one another to talk about it and clear the air. Going to bed angry is a terrible, terrible strategy. I would highly avoid or recommend avoiding that. You need to clear the air before you go to sleep every single time. But other than that, without wanting to be hypocritical, sometimes you just need to sleep. And sometimes you just need to say, can we just have peace and let's chat in the morning, and that's fine. You know, I don't know. This is all sounding terribly self-indulgent. I hope it's what you were hoping for. This is my lived experience.
That's exactly what I'm. That's what I'm looking for. The point, as we know with founders, is tell me how you did it. Tell me the lessons that you learned. Tell me your lived experience of this, and if it's relevant to me, I'll cherry pick the lessons and apply it. But without the flavoring, again, adjective deliberately chosen,
seasoning
is. The seasoning, thank you. Without the seasoning of your personal story, it's hard to visualize what that experience is. And naturally, that's human beings. How many of us learn is if we're talking about things that are relatively intangible, right? If I can actually see that playing out within a story-based format, that's why story has been used as a medium for learning for generations and millennia. Is that as long as I can understand your story, then I can understand the lesson. So please remain self-indulgent. It's useful.
Well, in that case, can I just share an anecdote with you then? Because I think there might be a wonderful learning. You've reminded me of something that I think would be very helpful. We were quite late to go to one of those international shows. I think that year it was Anuga. And me being me, I'd been telling Tracy for about 3 hours, this is the time we need to leave for the airport. You know, so Trace is like, are you aware? This is the time. This is when we have to leave. And as that time crept closer and closer and closer, I kept giving Tracy updates, you know, like Trace, we're leaving in an hour, Trace, we're leaving in 40, Trace, we're leaving in 20. And she is getting increasingly annoyed as if I'm the one creating the tension and stress. And eventually I said, Trace, we've got to leave in 5 minutes. And at this point, I see Tracy running down the corridor of the small cottage we used to own in Cape Town. And what she decided to do at that point is pull out a flat piece of metal sheet design that we had sent over from our design supplier or packaging supplier. But this was very sharp sort of sheet metal. And she'd pulled this out of this thing and she had completely sliced her finger wide open. I didn't know this, but what I did, I saw Tracy running down the corridor with her finger up like this. And we had, I think, about 40 minutes to get our car to where it would be safely parked for the week and a half that we were away, and then get to the airport at peak traffic time. I think the lesson to be learned in all of that is, even when you think things are perfectly planned, things will absolutely go wrong. The more no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. In this case, the enemy was Tracy and that piece of sheet metal. But we managed to get Tracy to a doctor's surgery, had her finger stitched up, called a friend to come and lend us her car, and then we drove the other car down to where we were going to park it, then drove the other car back. We're talking, this 40 minutes is now shrunk to we've got about 12 minutes to get from Cape Town to the airport. And then we made this poor friend of ours sit white-knuckled in the car while we sort of locked up the house and then sprinted at light speed along the N2. I'm sorry to anyone who happened to be in the traffic with us that day. But the truth is, Tracy and I laughed about it the whole way, even though she was on the verge of blacking out and, her finger was stitched up and she had it elevated in 5 layers of gauze and micropore. We thought it was funny. Until this day, we still laugh about those idiotic stories. But this has been the fabric of what's made the NOMU story exciting. It's all a bit last minute. It can sometimes be a little chaotic. But truthfully, if Tracy and I were not able to handle those moments, then you're certainly not going to be able to handle the rest. But humor is very, very helpful.
No matter what business you have, actually getting proper feedback from your customers or prospective customers is critical. But the point is, it's like emphasizing good feedback and bad feedback as well. And especially if you're in like the B2C space and you're selling directly to customers, getting them to actually fill out surveys and give you feedback is also quite hard. So can we actually just spend a couple minutes and just unpacking to me is like, what is that you guys have learned and like, what have you done in the past and made like, what are the mistakes that you made around trying to get useful feedback from your tenants? And what are the systems that you built to be able to do that well now?
I think the best feedback we get is when we offer some sort of incentive to fill out the form, because we've got 4,000 tenants now. As much as we talk to the tenants when we're on site and our staff talk to the tenants and give us feedback, to get 2,500 people of the 4,000 voting on which type of curtain rail they prefer, that gives you a real sample. So for something like that, we'll give I think we did a 20,000 Rand or 30,000 Rand cash prize for, we say, give us your best idea, whatever you want, from how we market our buildings, from your process of signing up with us, to your move-in process, to your living process, to your common areas, whatever you want, give us your best idea. And the best idea is going to get 20,000 Rand cash, second best, 15,000 Rand cash. So it's, that's a bigger prize than most people think's necessary, but 20 grand to get an idea that we implement in a business of this size, it's for free, So I think it's about going big on that prize to get people actually engaged with thinking, what's something that I can improve about this business? And we've got some really valuable insight from that. But otherwise, just it's people's homes, it's their everyday. So we, if you position the messaging right in the body of the email for the survey, guys, we really want to improve your living experience with regards to this. Please take 2 minutes, and we can really help. We can make you happier, essentially. And we actually, even sometimes without a prize, and we get good feedback.
This makes me think of so many different founders out there listening to this, because it's the fact of the matter is in terms of building out features or part of the product or improving value for customers, I think if I can make it that abstract, but that's the point at the end of the day, is how can I make sure that we're adding as much value to our customers as possible? The fact is, it's we shouldn't be trusting our own assumptions and judgments, because we aren't the customer. And I think to do that and get the source out from them in order to inform it, and I just love the model of what you're doing, because I think the point of having some kind of majority buy-in to what you're going to do is actually quite critical, because of the fact that it's going to affect everyone. You can't have just a focus group or a sample size, because then you get that wrong and then suddenly no one likes it. You actually need to get the majority. And I kind of love that thinking around it's how is it that you can create some kind of incentive or reward mechanism to get a really significant number of your users or customers to be able to give you feedback and actually get them to vote on what the options are and what it is that they would prefer. I think not only is that a really good way to de-risk what it is that you're going to be prioritizing in your development and where you're going to be putting your cash in terms of forking it out for your business, but that's also a really cool customer experience at the same time. And besides the incentive and the cash that I get out, it's I feel like I was part of the decision-making process of what it is that I'm getting and what's here. And I imagine it just creates a bit more of this loyalty that people have towards where they're staying and being a tenant with you.
Absolutely. What's also important is for those listening who rent from an individual, your communication to your landlord is very limited to, have you paid your rent? Have you not? The geezer's leaking. Our tenants are getting questions. How can we make your life better? What do we need to do as a business for you to be more comfortable, to be happier? It's so directly attributable to their positive experience. And I think just them getting that, thinking, well, my landlord actually cares. And it's not a common thing for landlords, to be seen as this, someone who really cares for their tenant. Don't get me wrong. We capitalists and we need to get a return, and we're generating profits in our business. But ultimately, there's a lot of decisions we've made in the past that have negatively affected our returns, but have made the tenants' lives a lot better. And well, maybe in the bigger picture, that creates a bigger business because tenants are happier, they stay for longer. But I want to give a small story. We did an enormous deal in COVID. We bought the ex-PwC head office, 30,000 square meter office building, depths of COVID, and we wanted to call it the Nelson. Why? Nelson Mandela is a great guy, and it's the biggest one we've done, and let's give the honor to Nelson Mandela. And we did it. One of our surveys that Greg spoke about, we sent to tenants a drop down of 10 different choices or 12 different choices of names, and the Nelson came stone last. And the Apollo came first, and I thought that's a bit of a weird name, the Apollo. But the building was named the Apollo, and it's been the Apollo since. It's what the tenants want.
And that's it for this special edition of the Founder Files, wrapping up 2024. Thank you so much for listening to another full episode. Thank you for being an awesome audience member, and thank you for being an awesome follower of the podcast. And if you're not already following the podcast, please make sure to like, subscribe, and engage with us. It is the best way to support the podcast. It's the best way to help us not only attract amazing guests, but attract the recognition that the podcast deserves, so we can get this amazing content out there. We can get these lessons out there so more people can find out about it. So not only is it the best way to support the podcast, but it's also the best way to make me happy, is to know that you are getting value from this and liking, commenting, sharing, but most importantly, following and subscribing. So thank you very much for tuning into another full episode. I'll see you soon. Cheers.